Welcome back to New Rockstars. I'm Erik Voss, and why does James Gunn's Superman look like this, and like this, and like this? Whether you think this looks beautiful and stunning and vibrant, or distractingly fisheye and warped and artificial, might say more about you, your own history watching films, your own visual tastes, and how you acquired those tastes through the communal online fandom experience, more than it does about the actual artistic choices made by the filmmakers. But I still think this is an important conversation, because our tastes matter however we got them. And the more I've researched James Gunn's process making the Superman film and his early approach to the DC Studios plan, knowing the actual filmmaking technology being employed here and how it is different from the past will be especially important as we embark upon a new cinematic universe. So let's do another episode of New Rockstars, How They Made It. And if you like this video and want to support New Rockstars, please check out our merch store, nerdriot.shop, where we got all kinds of really cool designs that are exclusive to this store, and they go directly to supporting us here at New Rockstars. Now, a quick answer to the question of why Superman looks like this in the movie is that James Gunn and his cinematographer Henry Braham are using the Leica Tri-Elmar lens, but I'm going to explain what that is and why it's important. Really, the whole idea for this video came out of a conversation I was having with New Rockstars head of production John Costa, a guy who knows a lot about cameras and lenses and lighting and editing, certainly more than I do, so I just generally respect his opinion on cinema aesthetics and production approaches more than I do the opinions of others, even when we don't always agree, because we were looking at the new footage for Superman, like the May trailer, the June tickets on sale trailer, the various social media posts and TV spots, and even these out of context clips of the flying imagery being shared in some corners of social media that are just really highly scrutinizing the imagery of this film. I have loved every second footage I've seen for this movie, but I have to admit that I am probably just biased. Like, I want this movie to succeed. I can't extract that bias away from my ability to analyze this imagery. And I wanted to better understand why others didn't feel the same way. Like, I know why some of them feel the way they do, because yeah, there's a whole group of people who were gonna shit on this movie no matter how it looked. And I've been doing this long enough to see the various double standards and bad faith arguments and media illiteracy and logical gymnastics that they are having to do to try to make people think this movie's gonna be bad, or really just to make the online narrative around this movie impossible to partake in. I don't engage with that conversation. I get it, and I get why it's happening, but I'm not gonna help it continue. However, I'm also experienced to know that that's not the conversation everyone is having around this movie. Not everyone who's uncertain about this movie is coming from the same place. Not everyone who just dislikes the way a movie looks is automatically a troll, so I don't want to scare anyone out of voicing valid distaste for something out of fear of being labeled something that they're not. And so John and I, as friends, were just looking through a lot of these shots, specifically Superman flying in this film, and the way those particular shots have evolved throughout the marketing life cycle of the film, and how they compare to the flying techniques used by Richard Donner's team in the 1978 Superman film, a film that we actually broke down the groundbreaking filmmaking techniques in a separate video recently. We looked at the way Bryan Singer showed flying imagery in 2006's Superman Returns, how Zack Snyder showed the aerial imagery in 2013's Man of Steel, and 2016's Batman v Superman, and 2021's The Snyder Cut of the Justice League. We looked at flying characters in the MCU, like Iron Man, Doctor Strange, Captain Marvel, Wanda Maximoff, and Adam Warlock, and realized, woof, for characters not made of metal or encased in metal suits, Marvel really hasn't moved the ball that far forward. But John made a good point that since Richard Donner's Superman, Hollywood has kind of figured this out, or at least they should have, from the Matrix films, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, Iron Man, The Boys on Prime Video. And I agree, I think we have mostly figured it out. So much so that I think we just kind of take it for granted. But I think we should also recognize that since Richard Donner's marketing for the 1978 Superman promised audience, quote, "You will believe a man can fly," that the character of Superman, at least on the big screen, has held a very high standard for how good the aerial photography should look. Perhaps an impossibly high standard. Like, you could argue nothing will ever be good enough. That's a higher standard than we've ever held for the MCU. And I recall that for Zack Snyder's Man of Steel, I really enjoyed how that movie looked at the time, specifically the flight sequences. But then I challenged myself, because I've seen Man of Steel several times. I broke down Man of Steel for the New Rockstars channel, and still, at the point of having this conversation with John, I couldn't really remember what Henry Cavill looked like in close-up or a medium shot while he was actually flying in that movie. Like, I definitely remembered the amazing context around his initial launch, like his fist on the icy rocks as they started to vibrate, the speed of his takeoff, the shots of him from our perspective on the ground as he broke the sound barrier, and of course Hans Zimmer's incredible score. But in terms of Cavill Superman's actual flight, I only remember that Zack Snyder had these Kryptonian characters moving so fast that we often just saw them in wide, zipping over to each other and knocking the shit out of each other. Like in the iconic shot of Kal-El bashing into General Zod over and over above Metropolis rooftops. Looking back, we only saw Henry Cavill from behind in those shots. And yeah, I know right now you could be going over to your Blu-ray and popping in Man of Steel, or be honest, YouTube user, you're probably just gonna pull a compressed version of whatever that shot is from YouTube, or find some brightened contrast adjusted 5-second video GIF from social media to make your counterpoint. Sure, I bet you can find a close-up of Henry Cavill Superman during flying scenes in that movie. I'm not saying we never saw it. I'm just saying that it's hard for even people who talk about superhero movies for a living to remember what those particular shots look like. To which I ask myself, is it a good thing when fantastical imagery in movies just passes the test of not standing out, not making us cringe? I think about this a lot because there was some cultural shift that happened at the end of the aughts going into the 2010s where film audiences began to sour on what they saw as bright, oversaturated camp in film. And the example I often go to is the type of filmmaking that you saw used by Sam Raimi in Spider-Man 3. And there's a lot of different ways we could look at that single film, but you could definitely see a contrast between that and what John described as the Paul Greengrassification of Hollywood. Paul Greengrass is the amazing director behind the Bourne Identity films, Captain Phillips. It's really talking about a shift toward gritty naturalism, realism, desaturation, kind of a shaky cam. You feel like you're part of a documentary crew that's following this action. And I'm saying this with nothing but love for Paul Greengrass. He is one of the best filmmakers. And I even love all the filmmakers who were doing the same thing as part of this shift. But I really think it was a shift responding to the changing tastes of the time. And I think what was guiding that was a fear of cringe and a need to try to avoid cringe at any cost. People didn't want to get made fun of on social media. So John reminded me of this video by Patrick Tommaso, who makes videos that I really love on his YouTube channel. Patrick reacted to the December teaser for the Superman film, addressing the very question of why Superman looks like this. And he explained that James Gunn and his cinematographer Henry Braham are using a specific kind of lens called a Leica Tri-Elmar lens, which allows a shift among 3 focal lengths of 16mm, 18mm, and 21mm without changing lenses in a single shot. That's how you get this shot of Superman punching through the glass of his containment cell as we go from his boot to his fist to the glass, all staying in focus. It's so good that it looks a little unnatural to some. They're coupling this Leica lens with the RED V-Raptor, which is a large format cinema camera. It ultimately results in a very wide angle lens. And on top of that, Braham is also using a Stabilize Nano, which was actually devised for his work in 2021's The Suicide Squad, but an earlier version of the Stabilize was used in Sam Mendes' 1917. And that's what gives this well-focused, high-detailed shot also a very smooth fluidity. So smooth that people who spend all their lives online think it must be done with AI, even though it is not. It's just a hyper-realistic, one could argue, surrealistic way of capturing action within a frame. Now, Henry Braham was also the director of photography for James Gunn's Guardians of the Galaxy films and The Suicide Squad, and you may remember this kind of look in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. All of these films kind of look this same way, and I really like it. But it was also a look of another film Henry Braham shot, 2023's The Flash, directed by Andy Muschietti. Now, whenever anyone brings up The Flash, there are inevitably a lot of takes about how bad that movie was. But I've always felt that its issues came from a lot of other things. Poorly planned cameos, story issues, too much Ezra, and just some strange VFX choices. But that overall, the cinematography from Henry Braham was something that I personally really loved. I know, there are gonna be those of you who reject this whole style and think that I'm sounding crazy right now and that The Flash was trash. But I'm just asking you to consider what specifically about it looked bad to you, because I can't see anything bad with it. I loved how Michael Keaton's Batman looked and moved in that movie. I loved how Sasha Calle's Supergirl looked, specifically in Sunset during her escape scene. And I feel like trying to talk to people online about this, it's kind of like, is a dress blue and black or is a dress white and gold? But that is the point of bold artistic choices. I personally just like how the Leica looks, especially in shots in natural sunlight, how bright the colors are, how sharp the detail is, how smooth the action is, and yes, how it transports me out of a reality that only Paul Greengrass seemed to be able to capture in a natural way. I understand that when I was coming of age in my tastes of cinema, that the popular style at the time was just that approach, and that in some ways I was primed to think that is what normal is, when in reality, there's no such thing as normal when we're looking at an artificial recreation of reality called cinema. Today's video is sponsored by Blue Chew. Summer movie season is almost upon us, and while we're all hoping for record-breaking blockbusters, sometimes you wind up with a flop. Watching a flop in a packed theater can be fun, but a flop in the bedroom? That hits different. Luckily, Blue Chew's here to turn your flops into movie magic. Blue Chew is a unique online service that delivers the same active ingredients as Viagra, Cialis, and Levitra, but in chewable tablets and at a fraction of the cost. Blue Chew's tablets are made in the USA and prepared and shipped direct to your door in a discreet package. It's super easy too. Just sign up at bluechew.com, consult with one of their licensed medical providers, and once you're approved, you'll receive your prescription within days. You can take Blue Chew anytime, day or night. That way you can plan ahead or be ready whenever an opportunity arises. It's all done online. That means no visits to the doctor's office, no awkward conversations, and no waiting in line at the pharmacy. If you're skeptical or don't think you need it, try it free for a month and see. Make life easier by getting harder and discover your options at bluechew.com. And we've got a special deal for our listeners and viewers. Try your first month of Blue Chew free when you use the promo code ROCKSTARS. Just pay the $5 in shipping. That's promo code ROCKSTARS. And visit bluechew.com for more details and important safety information. And we thank Blue Chew for sponsoring today's video. So yes, I understand that in the flight shots in Superman, despite how much James Gunn is trying to recapture the magic of Top Gun Maverick's aerial photography, it does end up at times morphing David Cornsweet's face so that he kind of looks like a pudgy AI John Krasinski. Because I understand that the trade-off is the Leica allows me to see more micro expressions on the actor's face as he is emoting his way through the scene, because he's telling the story of a guy just trying to get from A to B to save an innocent person or to knock the crap out of some asshole who's trying to hurt someone. And for those of you not liking the effect of the teeth hitting the camera, some commenters actually point out that it's probably not breaking the fourth wall because Lex Luthor's drones are always hovering around these battles, and it's probably just the teeth hitting Lex's drone camera lens, making this a gesture from Superman to Lex directly. But it is okay if there's just something about the wide angle lens of the Leica Tri-Elmar that just doesn't sit right with you. The Leica was used in movies like The Substance and Alex Garland's Civil War, and in both of those cases, the directors of photography used those lenses to force the viewer to focus closely on images and sights that would make us uncomfortable. Is it the goal of James Gunn's Superman to make us uncomfortable? No, it's a character who's trying to reassure us. But in order to help us realize that this character is meant to be reassuring, they have to disrupt and discomfort our notions on what films should look like. When Zack Snyder and his director of photography for Man of Steel, Amir Maruki, shot it with the Aeroflex cameras to give a texture and a grain to that version of Superman, Snyder primarily used the Panavision C-Series and E-Series anamorphic lenses, as well as ATZ and a WZ2 lenses. Additionally, Snyder favored a custom rehoused 50mm Canon Dream lens, which is also used in Batman v Superman, which was shot by director of photography Larry Fong. However, since then, Snyder has chosen RED V-V sensors. In Army of the Dead, for example, he used a wide open aperture and custom lenses with a bespoke sumiscope. Henry Braham, using the Leica, by contrast, I think, is to use that same lens that we saw used in The Substance and Civil War, specifically to make us focus on things that we thought were not popular, things that we thought would be cringe, but instead to lean in to those things to make us cringe as a type of exposure therapy to reconnect us with our youth so that we realize that we don't have to cringe at these things. They're clearly not worried about the 5-second GIF where a flying character looks a bit goofy. They're focused on just the context of a full 8-minute edited sequence in a film as they try to make you love a character who embraces elements that simply amount to clowning. This seems to be a philosophical choice that also affected Gunn and David Cornsweet and their costume designer Judiana Makrovsky deciding to give Superman trunks in this movie. In a Fandango interview, James Gunn explained how he asked Zack Snyder about trunks, and Zack Snyder said that he couldn't find a way to make them work. But then David Cornsweet jumped in to explain that the whole point of Superman is to be a bit corny, to wear bright colors and make goofy jokes so that kids and scared people watching him save the day will be less afraid.
Well, you wanted trunks in theory. You liked the idea of trunks.
Theoretically, I like the idea of trunks because it's, you know, Superman I grew up with.
But the problem is they look kind of silly. You were looking for a way to make them look cool, or you were looking for a function, an explanation for having them that would justify them.
Yeah.
And my thing was just maybe they're supposed to look a little silly. Maybe the reason he wears them is to look a little silly, basically to undermine how powerful he really is.
So personally, I love how the wide-angled Leica showcases action in a dreamlike way and allows shots to be brighter and more vibrant. And I admit, it might not be for all of you, but I believe that movies should transport us to magical places, to scary places, but should transport us somewhere out of our lives, but also criticize some of the choices made here, because I don't know if shooting something like this makes the most sense to put it in IMAX too. Like, I'm gonna sound a bit like a snob here. I may have already sounded like a snob snob in this video, I don't care. But I don't think any director other than Christopher Nolan has actually understood the full power of IMAX as a narrative medium. Actually, I'm not even sure if Christopher Nolan fully gets it. But like, there are sections of Ryan Coogler's Sinners that did not need to be in IMAX. Sections of Top Gun Maverick that Joseph Kosinski did not need to put in IMAX. But I understand it was a trade-off because there were IMAX sequences in both of those films that made it totally worth it. So is it important to see Henry Braham's Leica imagery in an immersive IMAX screen? Would they look just as colorful and stunning on any other screen? Would it be better to experience this movie symphonically at first in a Dolby theater? That is totally up to you, dear viewer. In fact, watch Ryan Coogler's breakdown of the different cinema screen formats. It might be the most important video for a cinema goer to watch this year, especially if you're weighing how much these tickets cost. Now, James Gunn told his longtime friend and Smallville Lex Luthor actor Michael Rosenbaum in his Inside of You podcast back in June 2023 that James Gunn's creative braintrust at the launch of the DCU consisted of him, Peter Safran, the co-head of DC Studios, and this cinematographer we've talked about, Henry Braham, as well as the costumer we talked about, Judiana Makovsky, and VFX supervisor Stefan Soretti, who's the award-winning VFX genius behind a lot of the best IP movies, including everything at Marvel and DC and other Christopher Nolan films, like that shot of David Bowie coming out of the electrodes in The Prestige. That was Soretti. And it's significant to note that the creative team figuring out what this DCU will look like in the future is a group of artists. Nothing against Marvel Studios. Marvel Studios remains a success story unparalleled by anyone else. I don't know if James Gunn will do as well as Kevin Feige has. But at the center of the Marvel Studios brain trust is Kevin Feige, who, yes, is a uniquely talented producer, a once-in-a-generation figure, but surrounding him is just an inner circle of other producers, many of whom who got to where they are by working assistant desks at Marvel's Manhattan Beach offices in the early 2010s and just kind of stuck around while people like Jon Favreau and Joss Whedon and James Gunn and the Russo brothers and Ryan Coogler made billion-dollar hits for them. And by looking at the troubled times Marvel Studios is going through, it seems to me that the artists are not driving the conversation. But over at DC Studios, trusting the artists just means that some artistic choices are going to stand out, and they're gonna feel weird, especially if we've been primed by over a decade of IP film having to look a certain way, and that certain way feeling normal to us. But ultimately, I want these artists to make big choices, and I trust them to make the right choices as the DCU shifts into different corners like Gotham City. Anyway, this is why Superman looks like this, and why it could be a good thing, and why you're not wrong if it's not for you. Comment down below with your thoughts on all this, and a special thanks to one of our YouTube members, Jeremy Dunham, who supports us at the executive producer level. Follow me at EA Voss and subscribe to all channels of the New Rockstars Network for breakdowns and news coverage of everything you love. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.